Yes. Our sermon text this morning is going to come from Galatians 2:15 through 21. You can find it on page 1811. If you're flipping to it, if you'd like to read along, I'm going to give you a little background while we're looking for it. So when Paul first arrived in the mountains of hillsides of Asia Minor, some years prior to the writing of the epistle, in the middle of what is now Turkey, he encountered a mixed community. There were Greeks and Celts, Roman soldiers and native peoples, Jews and Gentiles. He arrived into a mixed community, but he left them with a single message, the message of Jesus Christ. They looked past the hereditary titles that divided them, looked past lines of their ancestry, and found a truth in Paul's one gospel. After he left Galatia, however, the seeds of dissension began to ferment. Opposition to Paul began to seep in and divide Paul's one gospel into pieces. These opponents started teaching that in order to be Christian, you had to be Jewish first. The Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians began separating themselves from one another. The Jewish Christians withdrew from the company of their Gentile brothers and sisters. They started sitting at different tables. They started having separate meals. They would come out for the Sunday, grab a scoop of Neapolitan, and find a place to sit away from the other. There were those that followed the laws of the Old Testament at one table, and the ones that didn't at another. And it wasn't long before Peter looked around and picked up his scoop of Rocky Road and went over to sit at another table. Even Barnabas, left the Gentile fellowship behind. Now, I can't imagine what's going on to the minds of the Gentiles when all this was going down. They could have been looking over their shoulders and thinking, gosh, I want to be like those guys. They may have been thinking, I'd like to be part of them. I want to be part of the in crowd. And even though I can't imagine what the Gentiles were thinking, we can certainly imagine what Paul was thinking. He was ticked. He goes after Peter and rebukes him. You are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile, he tells him. How is it then you force Gentiles to live like a Jew? It's as if to say, are you kidding me? Come on, guys, even you, Barnabas, even you. And then he followed up his thoughts with the following. This is verse 15 through 21. We who are Jews by birth and not sinful Gentiles know that a person is not justified by the works of law, but by faith in Jesus Christ. So we too have put our faith in Christ Jesus, that we may be justified by the faith of Christ, and not by works of law. Because by the works of law no one will be justified. But in seeking to be justified in Christ, we Jews find ourselves also among sinners. That doesn't mean that Christ promotes sin. Absolutely not. If I rebuild what I destroyed, then I really would be a lawbreaker. For through the law, I died to the law so that I might live for God. I have been Christ crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, then Christ died for nothing. What in the world is Paul seeing here? What exactly are these works of law? See, in Paul's day, you could tell who was what by how they followed the law. You could tell who was Jewish Christian and who was Gentile Christian by how they followed the laws of the Old Testament. Works of the law created an arbitrary checklist. They were evidence of their ethnic identity. Let's see here. Went to synagogue? Check. Obeyed food laws, no pork chops, etc., check. What? You missed your bar mitzvah? Everything is still all together? Got to be a Gentile. Check. The Sabbath, the food laws, and circumcision all determine the Jewish Christian sense of identity. You can tell a Gentile Christian from a Jewish Christian by these works of law. In our day, we have works of law too. We have our own way of joining in with the in crowd. Sure, it's not as dramatic as what we find in Galatia. Nobody's going to stop you at the door. Make sure that the procedure took, or you check your pockets for pork chops. But we have our own marks of identity. We do our own things to get into the in crowd. We laugh at the right time, cry when appropriate, wear the jersey for the home team, drive the right car, wear the right clothes, own the latest iPhone to go with our iPad so we can get our iTunes on our iPod. Maybe we hide our country accent when we're in the city. Or we hide our city accent when we're in the country. I know one time Sheena and I were out in Abington, just out about an hour and a half west of Roanoke. And I felt these eyes staring at me from the back of my neck. And I turned around, this guy kind of smiles. Y'all ain't from around here, are ya? Yeah, my accent must have given it away. You just can't throw enough y'alls and I reckons to be part of the in crowd. Yeah, I wonder if this is how the Gentile Christians felt back in Galatia. I wonder if this is how some of us may have felt. Maybe you were kicked off the greens on a golfing afternoon because you weren't dressed right. Maybe you were left out of the restaurant with your friends because you just didn't have the right dress to wear. Maybe we were locked out of church. Not this church, but any church. Because our jacket was in the cleaners, our only tie was keeping the plumbing together, and all we had to wear was our finest Sunday t-shirt. Maybe we were excluded by works of law. These works of law don't have to be just what we say or what we wear. Works of law are anything that reveals our cultural identity. There are marks. Some have darker skin, some don't. Some of our first languages might be Spanish, others might be English. And yes, some of us might be Jews by birth, and others of us are Gentiles. And we learn in life to divide, to categorize, to associate with one ethnic identity or another. We can say to ourselves, oh, she wears the expensive clothes, so she must go to this church, or that. We can say, he's black, so he must go to the black church. Or she is south of the Rio Grande, so she must be Catholic. Oh, and that one, with the shaved head and earring, I think he's Baptist. We say that there is a difference. We can say that there is a difference between the Jewish Christian and the Gentile Christian. We can say these things. We can say these things, but we don't. Not here. Because we know better. We know that we aren't made righteous by the works of the law, but by Christ and Christ alone. It doesn't matter if you are Jew or Gentile. We are all made righteous by the same source, the loving offer of Christ at Calvary. The marks of who we are immaterial. It doesn't matter what jersey you wear on a Saturday afternoon, regardless if you have a Redskins jersey or a Steelers hat. We are all redeemed through the loving offer of crucifixion. And as hard as it may be for some of us to believe, there's a place in heaven for cowboy fans too. So, don't look at me, John. It wasn't my idea. We know that we are not saved by these marks of identity, but by Christ. You may have John 3:16 tattooed up one arm and Psalm 23 down the other. It is not going to bring you any closer to God. It is only our faith in Christ, by the faith in Christ, that we find ourselves on the path of redemption. It is not our race, our gender, our sexual orientation, our social class, or our economic health that can bring us into righteousness. Instead, it is the love of Christ, the love with Christ, and the love through Christ that we are redeemed. Not only we were redeemed, we are redeemed, and we will be redeemed. When Christ walked from the tomb, we rose again as believers too. We were no longer Jews and Gentiles. We were no longer black and white. We were no longer gay or straight. We arose to become something new, a brand new creation. We became Christian. And if we start looking for things to divide us, if we start trying to find these works of law to define our ability to become Christian, we are not only defining our community, we are defining Christ. Because we know that Christ transcends any baggage that our flesh may carry. We know, Jew, Gentile, Christ loves us all the same. This was Paul's message to the Galatians. This is Paul's message to us. And I know we know this. I know because I've seen it. Years back, a guy walked through those doors. And the year before, he had gotten divorced. His son moved away, his grandmother passed on, he lost his job, he lost his health insurance, and bills were piling up faster than the checks could bounce. He felt like he had nothing to offer. He brought his girlfriend, too, and his daughter, and nobody said a thing. Nobody said a thing except, "Come, eat with us." And it was that guy, who had spent the first half of his life chasing dollar bills and had nothing to show for it. It was that guy who had so many chances to give to God, and all he did was give to himself. It was that guy who spent so much time in sin, so much time outside the law, that he did not know where he belonged. And somehow, across all of space, time, across all the worst of law, reached out, you poked him. You brought him back into the in crowd. You taught him that those marks of law, those scars of his history, meant nothing compared to the love of Christ. Somehow, across the time that spans our lives, somehow you found that guy. That guy who was incapable of being loved. That guy who felt like church was for other people. That guy who had been beaten up and eaten up and discarded by works of law. You found him and you poked him. And you reminded him that Christ's love transcends the markings of our history. That Christ's love goes beyond our flesh. That Christ's love is for all Christians. Even you. Even me. So when I say that I know that we know, I say that because I have experienced it. I know we know because you have taught me. A couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to go to a planning meeting for our revival. I'm not sure what I was thinking before we went in, but when I left, I kept rethinking key words over and over in my head. He laid out the mission, and it reminded me of what it meant to be here at Elpis and what it meant to be a Christian. The revival is not just about us, he said. It's about the entire community, a place where all Christians can come together and celebrate our shared faith. This is what it means to be a people of Christ. So I know, we know, because I see it every day. But outside these walls, there's opposition still out there waiting to divide us, waiting to split the Jewish Christian from the Gentile Christians. You may have seen it on TV or maybe in the streets, carrying signs and saying, "Hooray for our side," and using the law to split us in half. The whole existence of the law is to be divisional, is to separate the guilty from the innocent. If this was the case, then Christ died for nothing. But in here, we know better. We know we are all guilty. And we also know that through our faith in Christ and the faith of Christ, we are made innocent. We know what it takes to be part of the in crowd.